Okay, so as Keila discussed, the depictions of slavery from Beloved and Amistad, movies of the late 20th century. I'm going to be moving into the 21st century with the 2013 film 12 Years a Slave and the 2016 film Birth of a Nation. So, first we have 12 Years a Slave. Come on. Ooh, no. Okay, so we have 12 Years a Slave, which is the true story movie adaptation of Solomon, who was a free black man who was kidnapped and smuggled back to the South to be sold as a slave. As we saw with Amistad and Beloved, this era's depiction of slavery in film focuses on the slave experience. So that's both physical, mental, emotional, very rounded, and doesn't shy away from the gruesome reality of slavery, which we see a lot of in 12 Years a Slave and especially in Birth of a Nation. This is something that becomes even more prominent in those two movies. So in 12 Years a Slave, however, we get to see echoes of some things that began in 1995 and so on, as you discussed in After Slavery presentation. So before Solomon is kidnapped, he and his family are in middle class, and are seen as equals among the community. And this is equacious with the growth of equality in society for other African American families. And this was becoming more common as the recent years went by. So, and we see this with growing populations of African Americans reaching a higher class, middle class. And in entertainment, we see a higher amount of figures in the public eye that are African American as well. But of course, with anything that has to do with slavery, there is also the negative note. So Solomon's kidnapping and enslavement can be equated to the high growth of the amount of Black incarceration in especially American prisons. This is something that is still going on and is causing continued victimization of the African American population. So, and it's causing more movements to get things visible to a greater population and to get things changed. So with Solomon, we saw that with this victimization, even though he was a free man, people, not just him, but many African Americans up in the North were tricked, kidnapped, taken back to the South. Even though they were completely innocent, they had the right to be free during that time. And then more recent with those that are being incarcerated, a lot of, especially male African Americans, a lot of them are given harsher punishments for maybe illegal things that they've done. They're completely innocent for illegal things that they are being blamed for. Or with other examples of African Americans being assaulted or being shot and killed by police officers or other people of the community. So the second film, Birth of a Nation, 2016, is a true story of the slave named Nat, who was a preacher for his area and later leader of the rebellion that he led in his area. Nat's story is one of leadership for the masses to cause change, which I found synonymous to Martin Luther King Jr. and a more recent figure being President Obama. Of course, Nat's method of rebellion or for causing change was more violent than both of these figures. But still, he was a big leader in his area, big leader figure that would be synonymous to the more recent figures today. And like I said, Birth of a Nation really capitalizes on the reimmersion of activism and with the desire to have the desire of fair judgment, fair opportunities, the change in the community and the country, something that people now have, and Nat wanting the change in his personal community, and I'm sure he had the bigger vision of eventually the whole country, even though his methods were far more violent and graphic than most that are happening more recently. But there are still violent acts of activism and rebellion to get this change and to see change. But it also brings light to what has been deemed recently as the Age of Rage and bringing forth countless voices of incontent over time with these violent approaches of the rebellion in the film. But over the past several weeks since we started looking at all these movies with the theme of slavery, it's amazing to see the depiction of slavery, how slavery has evolved and improved since where we started with the 1915 film Birth of a Nation to the 2016 Birth of a Nation. Same name between the two films, but they are completely different films, especially with their focus, who they're focusing on, with the 1915 film being one focusing on the South and how that was such, they were the protagonists and making fun of the slaves and the African American community and seeing them as these terrible people, to the 2016 version of Birth of a Nation, to where it's focused on the slaves and that what they were going through was not a good experience in any way, shape, or form, and what they're doing to get that freedom back for themselves. But many people would not realize or even consider how the years and the events surrounding a movie can influence the film and adjust the interpretation of that film to its audience, depending on, like, for example, the 1915 Birth of a Nation, the people that watched it, then of course it was divided between the North and the South. But seeing how people reacted to it in the South then to how people react to it now is completely different, because it all has to do with the time that it was released and how those people imagine it. So it's very different for us to watch these films as the time goes on and see one even from the 60s and see how we react to it compared to how people then would have reacted to it. But it'll be definitely something to keep our eyes on for the future and see how future films decide to later on depict slavery and see how it changes, if it changes, and just see how that ends up.